Hey, it's Dr. Rimka. Thank you for checking out my channel here on YouTube. If you like what you hear, please hit like, comment below, and share with your friends. You can see in the description links I may reference in my talk tonight and links to my online learning center or how to become a patient and products that I like and that I personally use and recommend. Um, it's late on a Saturday night. If you're joining me live, thank you for joining me. But I wanted to at least do something quick before Easter gets here tomorrow, because I've seen a lot of articles and posts and comments about some of the coronavirus and COVID-19 situation going on right now in, what is this? What month are we? April 2020. About several people, illnesses and complications, and they keep saying that people didn't have an underlying condition. There was no predisposition towards, there was nothing else. They weren't sick, they were healthy. And yet when you read the article or see the person's picture, it's very clear that that is not a healthy individual. I have been very disturbed at the level of normalization of pathology in our culture. We have a normalization of mediocrity and unhealthy lifestyle and body types. I think the prevalence and popularity of the term dad bod is part of showing that and proving it. So I wanted to give a little bit of science and education as to what's really going on and how being over fat is truly a major issue in increasing your risk of COVID-19 poor outcomes. And we have a tremendous amount of people, human beings, who have metabolic disorders that lead them to being over fat. And now they're being categorized as if they had no pre-existing condition of any sort because they weren't over 65 or weren't a smoker or didn't have a lung disorder such as asthma. Well, I hate to tell you, but these are major pre-existing conditions that are making these people extremely at risk. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no better time than now for you to learn how your immune system really works. And fundamentally, there's a part of your immune system that's under your direct control that requires no extra supplements because it is completely controlled by what you eat. Now, I've avoided talking about the food and what you eat because so many people are talking about it, but let's just go ahead and get it done, right? So why is it that obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and actually old age are huge risk factors for having much poorer outcomes with COVID-19? I'll explain this to you by talking about leptin, sugar, cholesterol, and how anyone actually, like I have a neat little thing, actually is deeply at risk of any infection and is having an immune suppressed response. All right, so first of all, I do want to say that being over fat is not the same as being overweight. This kind of comes down to a really bad measurement that we do called BMI. I never record it in my practice. I think it's a stupid number because a bodybuilder would have a bad BMI. So it's really more all about body fat composition, which is how much fat to how much muscle, what are the ratios, as well as breaking down the type of fat deposits you have. So abdominal fat is very different, for example, than hip fat, right? And organ fat, which we would call visceral fat, fat packed around your organs inside, is particularly dangerous. Why? Excess body fat leads to an increased risk of chronic disease, infections, and a compromised immune system. Why is that? Like, I think some of you guys have heard this, but I'm not sure you understand why. And it comes down to this conversation. We're going to just talk about a few things: leptin, sugar, and cholesterol. Just going to unpack it a little bit, okay? So hang in with me. Leptin is a hormone, and it's an inflammatory cytokine made by fat cells. You may have never heard of it, so I want you to know what I'm talking about. Leptin, hormone, and inflammatory cytokine. It's made by your fat cells. All right. It's especially made by the visceral fat, that fat around your organs. So the more fat you have, the more leptin you make. And the more visceral fat you have, the more leptin you make on top of the leptin you make, right? This means that the more fat you have, the more leptin you have, the more pro-inflammatory you are. All right. So leptin is a blood hormone, again, and the more fat you have, the more leptin you make. That's one thing you need to understand. That's just generally how it's going to be. Your levels will be higher the more body fat you have, the more visceral fat you have in particular. But a little bit something that's not talked about as much is what you eat causes direct surges in leptin from the food, no matter how much body fat you have. So I might have a lower body fat than someone else, but if I eat a meal that causes a large spike in leptin, I can still double my leptin. And if I have repeated surges, I keep repeating eating like that day after day, I'm going to have really high like spikes and surges in my leptin, which is going to do something that's called, it's going to destroy my sensitivity to my leptin in my cells and in my brain. And that's going to cause a big problem. So the more fat you have, the more leptin you make. And what you eat causes direct surges in leptin from the food. What causes that? High carbohydrate meals, high sugars. That's what does it. Okay. I know nobody wanted to hear that, but that's the truth. So, and when you do this, you repeat this over and over again with these spikes and surges in your leptin coming up from what you eat. This causes leptin resistance. Well, what does leptin resistance mean? Okay. The part of your brain is called the hypothalamus, ends up no longer like hearing the leptin. So it thinks you end up having low leptin. It's like your child screaming at you, mom, 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 dad, dad, dad. After a while, you just kind of numb them out in a way, and it's just you don't really hear them as loud as they were for a while, so you start to ignore them. That's how hormonal signals work as well. Leptin is too loud. After a while, your hypothalamus has to shut down so it doesn't really hear it. So eventually it starts to think you have low leptin even when your leptin is really high. So if your leptin is high, it means it thinks your body is really struggling. I mean, so if it's low, it thinks it's low, even though when it's high. So it thinks it's low. So it's like, wait, leptin's way too low, which means the body fat is way too low. So I have to tell my body to save up and store more fat because this is dangerous, and definitely stop burning fat because we can't afford to burn fat. We can't afford to lose fat because we don't have enough leptin. So we must not have enough fat. We must be starving or in a famine. This is dangerous. So the brain ends up getting confused by the really high levels of leptin. It kind of becomes numb, so to speak, to it. And it thinks you have low body fat when you really have really high body fat. So it also makes you really hungry to get more fat on you to protect you. This is how you get over fat, by eating a bunch of carbs and sugar. It's a hormone problem caused by leptin resistance. Okay, that's what actually is really happening. Now, let's just talk about sugar in general. Okay, eating sugar impairs your immune system, period. No matter how you do it. It does something, it glycates your proteins, it oxidizes them. What does this mean? Just as far as your immune system goes, all of your antibodies are proteins. If you've got too much sugar floating around, it combines with those proteins. It also combines with the DNA. It sticks to them. It's highly reactive. It's called an oxidant. It oxidizes them. It destroys the receptors on the outside. It increases inflammation, destroys the ability of all of those cells, the immune cells, to have a normal immune response. And this is immediate. It happens within like one meal. It boom, high sugar meal. Within hours, we can measure all of this in your blood, watching the impaired immune response. So making choices right now to eat high sugar meals is not a smart thing to do. Okay. So you can change your diet immediately then, right? You can like, let's cut out the sugar and the carbs and have an immediate change in how your immune system responds. Something I want to point out. So therefore, if you know that, the hospitals, right, should be low sugar immediately. But most hospitals are actually giving out dextrose in water, raising blood sugar, raising blood insulin, and raising blood leptin. Because the reality is healthcare does not try to lower leptin. They don't really even seem to understand this hormone and its immune connection or get its huge implications. So what the hospitals are giving right inside, you know, to their patients, to me, is making everybody worse, right? That's what's going on. The question is why? That's what I can't figure out. Well, maybe I can, but I want you to know that. I want you to start thinking, why are they doing this, right? So what we know is that a high carb diet is what leads to high leptin, low adiponectin, just another hormone, don't worry about it, and high insulin. This combination is not compatible with health. What you want to have is low leptin, high adiponectin, and low insulin. That makes you a metabolically healthy individual with a really beautiful immune system. Why? Leptin is pro-inflammatory and causes the cytokine storm. Now, I know you've maybe heard that phrase in relation to coronavirus and COVID-19, the cytokine storm. I'm not going to get into all the details of what that is, but this is the general gist of how leptin's involved in that. Leptin has very strong involvement with the immune system. If you have high leptin from having leptin resistance, you will not have a healthy immune response. You will be at higher risk from getting and not defeating any infection, not just this one. This one and any bigger and better one that's coming down the pipeline. All right. It's involved with the dangerous cytokine storm because it's so pro-inflammatory. Leptin is actually a cytokine itself, but it is an intermediate mediating messaging system to release interleukin 6. Interleukin 6 has been shown to be probably a very big issue with the COVID cytokine storm that's causing bad outcomes and death in people. So lowering interleukin 6 could be a really, really, really key therapy in treating patients in this acute situation, especially in the hospital. It's used in arthritis and other things. So there's medications that are going after trying to lower this in patients already. So they are using meds to try and manage this with other disease processes that are related to leptin disorders, actually. Okay. Hope you guys are doing all right with all this. So I want you to remember high leptin and leptin resistance. It's a huge part of the metabolic disorders such as diabetes, obesity, hypertension. And it naturally this is what happens as we get older. Leptin gets a little bit higher and we get some leptin resistance, which these are all these major predisposing conditions for COVID-19 complications and real threat to life, right? Leptin also influences the innate and adaptive immune system directly. It directly affects every type of white blood cell you have because they're all leptin responsive, and leptin levels are helping to coordinate it. What leptin really is doing is kind of a coordination of the immune system, of the innate and adaptive, and directly with those white blood cells and natural killer cells. It kind of having bad leptin coordination, you could kind of look at it like, instead of turning everything into a beautiful symphony and it's really masterful, it's kind of like your kid's really bad garage band when they're 12 years old. Okay. Or what you sounded like when you're 12, because nobody plays instruments anymore. I don't know, right? But that to give you an idea. It's why that's why leptin, high leptin and leptin resistance, and it's involved in all autoimmune diseases of rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, MS. Those all have very high leptin in all those diseases. So keeping leptin low is critical to maintaining a healthy immune system. If you want good natural killer cells, you have to have low leptin. Otherwise, they become desensitized to the excess leptin, and they're no longer going to work to protect you. The same way the hypothalamus in the brain became numbed out, the natural killer cells, white blood cells, the same thing happens, right? Leptin also regulates the hypothalamus in your brain, like I said, and the thymus and the thyroid, and a whole lot more. And now here's the kicker with this, which is really important to know, right? This is a big deal. There are no drugs to lower leptin. There are no magic bullet supplements for it either. But since leptin resistance makes you weaker and has your immune system become inaccurate, the immune system is uncoordinated and chaotic, I think you should really want to know how to lower your leptin for good, be in control of it short-term and long-term, because the worst outcomes in this infectious disease, and all of them, will be coming from low redox potential, which I've talked about in some other videos, and high leptin. So let's talk about just leptin. How do you lower leptin, right? And improve the redox? Again, remember, no drugs for it, right? It's probably why you don't know about it, because no one's making a commercial about it. It's not going to happen. Right? It's a totally drug-free approach. And so no one's going to sponsor a $1 billion ad campaign to tell you about it. There's no profit for a pharmaceutical firm in this, much less even a nutraceutical firm. It's probably why most physicians and definitely hospitals don't even test your leptin levels, because this all comes down to what foods you eat. How do you do it? Dump all your ultra-processed fake foods. This is the time to eat meat, eggs, fish, and add just a little bit of a shorter eating window. Just stick to 8 to 10 hours. Don't eat for 15 hours in a day. Just can you bring it to 8 to 10 hours only? And within one day, if you did that, you would dramatically improve your immune system. Leptin is way faster to respond than insulin. So within one day, you can drastically cut down leptin. Insulin's going to take you maybe a week when you ditch the sugar and the carbs, but within like 7 days, you're going to be like a whole new person as far as your leptin, levels are concerned. By doing that, your immune system will have a chance to understand itself again, to coordinate itself again. So as far as I'm concerned, there is no better time than now to add cholesterol-rich foods like eggs, meat, and fish into your diet. And I'm going to talk a little bit about cholesterol because I love it. All right? No better time right now, and stick with it. This is not the time to be adding fruit smoothies to your diet. And leptin is a big part of why. Cholesterol, it's a healing compound, and it's used to fight this infection and every other infection. If you eat it, you lower the demand of your liver to make it, and you have an ample supply available for your body to use in your immune response. If you are taking, and let me tell you, if you're taking a cholesterol lowering drug, you will be at even a greater risk of not being able to mount a winning response. Here's why: because cholesterol lowering drugs impair your immune system. You cannot make any new cells without cholesterol, and to ramp up your immune response, you have to make a whole lot of white blood cells in a very short amount of time. And if you're low on cholesterol, this will take a whole lot longer and you won't be able to do it very well. Okay. So it's why I'm super not into cholesterol panels, and any patient of mine, anybody in my courses know I like a much higher number than your labs are actually saying. So when someone says, oh, but I have high cholesterol, I'm like, show me the number, put up the numbers, and let's see what you really have. And most of the time they actually have beautiful and healthy numbers, and they're being artificially suppressed from people who, are basically trying to sell you a pill, right? So cholesterol lowering drugs impair your immune system. Start looking some of this stuff up if you've never heard this before. So the question I want you to ask, yourself and the system, the paradigm that we're living in, why do the hospitals give nothing but sugar and more sugar to patients rather than traditional whole foods like meat, eggs, and fish that are proven to build your immune system? This is just all physiology. These are basic physiology books about what the immune system does and how it builds. This isn't fantastical information. This is just out there, right? It really, really is, right? So for me, and my hope and wish for you, what I want you to know is right now is not the time to be on a baking fest. I've seen so many people and posts and memes and whatever, ha, ha, ha. People are drinking alcohol, they're dipping all into the wine, and they're baking like crazy. Everyone's talking about the COVID-19. Like, people are gaining weight. I've lost weight. This is not the time to be packing on more fat. This is not the time to be stuffing your face full of cake. This is not the time to be baking. If that is the only way you know how to handle your stress, I suggest you find a course to take with somebody who can teach you other ways to process and handle the stress and emotions you're going through rather than eating and drinking alcohol. Because you don't want to raise your leptin right now. You don't want to be gaining more body fat and more visceral fat to raise your leptin even more right now. You want to lower your leptin. You want to be able to sleep better. You want to be able to lower the interleukin-6, decrease opportunity for a cytokine storm if you come down with an upper respiratory infection. There is no better time than right now to get yourself outside, become a sun-loving, tan, and I dare say even carnivore like me, so you can feel confident and safe knowing that your immune system completely has your back. And if you don't want to go all the way to carnivore, fine. Better be keto. Meat, fish, eggs, perfectly cholesterol containing, nice high fat, quality protein sources full of all kind of nutrients and micronutrients you need. Ditch the sugar, ditch the grains. You want to sprinkle in a bit of low carb vegetables, knock yourself out. Be careful even with the fruits, you guys. Okay? As that insulin goes up, that leptin will go up with it, even from fruit. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd rather not track any of those things or think about it. That's why carnivore just works easy peasy for me. Meat, eggs, fish, all day long. I'm satisfied. I'm good to go. My cholesterol level is banging. My white blood cells are banging. My natural killer cells are ready to go. Tan. I'm in the sun. My redox potential, boom. Tons of fat, tons of redox charge. That's how you do it. Understand your leptin. You never had a blood draw on your leptin? I suggest you get one. Know your numbers. If you don't know your numbers, if you don't look at the reality, you're not going to be able to face the truth. You don't face the truth, you can't ever improve or progress in life. And that's what I want for you. Stay safe, eat a lot of high cholesterol, quality proteins, keep your leptin low, and you're going to be all right.